Welcome to the Follow the Leaders podcast, where we get a glimpse into the minds and lives of exceptional leaders and hear about their experiences, insights, and strategies for success. On today's episode, we'll hear from one heart-centered, effective leader and hear about their wisdom and perspective. So get ready to follow along. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so looking forward to what I know will be a very intriguing conversation with my guest today. Get a notebook and pen ready because today I have an expert joining me who has dedicated her career to helping leaders achieve greater success. And I know we will all learn so much from this conversation. My guest today is Dr. Carla Fowler. Dr. Fowler is an MD, PhD, and an elite executive coach. For the last decade, she has been a secret weapon for scores of CEOs, entrepreneurs, and other senior leaders. Dr. Fowler's unique approach combines the latest research from performance science with timeless best practices to help top performers level up and achieve their goals. Congratulations on all of your success and impact, Dr. Fowler, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It's great to be here.
I am so eager to hear so much more about your work. Let's start with what your current work life looks like. Can you fill listeners in on what you're doing?
Absolutely. So I have my executive coaching practice. It's called THAXA. On a day-to-day basis, one of the interesting things about coaching is you really want to be present and really fully immersed for your clients in what's happening for them. And I do a number of client meetings every day. So what that means is that I actually start my day earlier so that I can immerse in myself first. And what that looks like is often a little bit of time just thinking, just seeing where my brain is at the beginning of the day and creating. I often have this mantra. I just say like, hey, what does it look like to build a good day today? And
I love that.
That's different. It's really different from, oh, how do I get all the results I want today? It's very much a process thing of like, what are the actual activities that I will just engage in, and however they turn out, that I know that when I stack those kinds of days together, that the end compounding result of that is a good place. Even if on an individual day, you're like, well, that was kind of a crap day.
Yeah.
I usually exercise also because I find that just lets me really be present and calm and relaxed. Then like for each client, I am like listening to what's going on for them and trying to be really engaged and ask questions that help them move forwards. So then, most days are a good amount of coaching and sometimes meetings with potential clients. So going 0 to 1 with a new person and just trying to find out what are their goals, what are they interested in doing. And then sometimes I get the privilege of having a wonderful conversation on a podcast with a great host like yourself. And so there's a nice mix of things that sort of go throughout the day. And every day looks a little different. And for me, that's wonderful. Like routine and habits are very helpful because they're part of what really help us move forwards on something without having to think too much about it. But I also find I don't like every day to look exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. That is the balance, right? Of having enough structure and routine, but then having enough variety to keep us intrigued and invested. So I love hearing about how my guests have stepped into their work. And I'm really intrigued to hear about how your journey came to this point. I'm wondering, how did medical school turn into business ownership? And how did a surgery career plan turn into high-level coaching for leaders? I'm fascinated. I would love to hear this story.
Jamie, this is such a great question. And I can tell you 100% there wasn't this ulterior plan from the beginning. This is very much the result of leaning into what did I love? What did I find myself thinking about all the time? What was I really skilled and capable at? And then continuing to pay attention to what do I want? And even just trying to pay attention to whatever I was doing at one point in time. Is this what I thought it would be? Is it what I want now? Because of course we change as human beings, and what we wanted at 25 is different than 30, is different at 35. And so that's like the overarching themes. But from a very practical perspective, I've always been really interested in human problems, like I think wanting to make an impact for people. And I'm also a math and science nerd. And so medicine and medical scientific research seemed like a really good place to lean into those things. And also I knew that gaining that skill set, even though I didn't totally have planned. I mean, I think I thought I was going to go into academic medicine, be a professor, do some research, practice clinically. And the programs that train you to actually do that dual degree are funded. And so the other thing I was thinking was like, oh, if you can get through medical school without debt, that is a very strategic way to go. And it will just open up optionality later, right? Like debt can definitely tie us down or commit us to something that we might later decide we don't want to do, which I was not thinking at the time, but turned out to be very useful when I had finished my 9 years of scientific and medical training and then went into my residency at Stanford doing surgery. And I loved the surgeons because they really thought about hard decisions in an interesting way. Like surgery is a full commitment. You either cut someone open or you don't. And so you have to think ahead of time, and then you really have to commit to what you decide on. And I think there was something very appealing about that level of responsibility. And, you have the data you have, might not be perfect, but you still have to act. And choosing to not operate is as much a decision or an action as choosing to operate. And I think the other thing I really liked was that there's definitely a culture of sort of high performance about the whole surgical field. And, the checklists you run in the operating room to how the team has to function together. I really was attracted to that as well. So you could ask like, well, what happened? And I think the truth was coming to the end of that year was I hadn't quite found my home. So I loved that the surgeons were high performing in a number of ways, but it wasn't a very humanistic field in the sense of there just isn't a lot of time to engage with patients. And I loved all the behavior and the psychology of the psychiatry department, but I actually didn't want to become a psychiatrist. And so I had this moment where it was like, I'm not seeing the path forward. Like I don't have my home and there's a lot more training to go.
Yeah.
And I realized that I could build a practice that I really wanted. I was just going to have to build it outside of medicine.
Yeah, wow.
And so made that leap, I think 12 years ago, and used all my science training in a different way, which was to think about a different kind of unstructured problem. So rather than thinking about biology, what I wanted to think about was really the psychology and all of the different ideas that we have within that realm of performance science. So how do human beings really do their best work when they have challenging goals, when they have uncertain goals? And I wanted to develop a methodology to work with people around those kinds of high stakes decisions and questions. And so I finished the year that I'd committed to, let them know to fill my spot. And I left and started building.
That is so incredible. When I first reading about your company, I was like, this is so cool. I love the science approach to performance and leadership. And then when I dug more into your background, I was like, oh my goodness, this woman is incredible. To make a decision of that magnitude after you had already invested so much of your life, of your time. I mean, you say the MD PhD route was beneficial because of the debt, but it's so much more work than just regular medical school. And I say just regular medical school, but it's like not an easy way out, And so to have invested to that level and then to have the personal integrity and willingness to pursue that risk, to leave that, I mean, it lights me up so much because I do think that we're not given lots of opportunities, especially as women, to really assess, is this, like you said, is this our home? Is this where we want to be? Is this path that we're on really in alignment with where we want to head? And so I just have the most incredible amount of respect for you for getting that far down a path, a decision you made when you were in your probably early 20s to pursue this career path, to say that's not exactly right for me. And then to carve out your own journey is just there's so many nuggets in that. And so I just wanted to take a moment and really honor what gumption that takes and what honesty that takes and willingness to really change course. I'm just so impressed by you.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you.
So my next question is that I am so intrigued by your focus on performance science with your company Thaxa, and I would just love to hear more about this approach and what it means in implementation and your passion for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people often ask like, well, Carla, what is performance science? Like, how do you think about it? And the way I look at it is that we have a number of different just areas of thinkers or research that are trying to understand like how as human beings do we function at our highest levels and reach our greatest and fullest potential, and has its roots in sports, but very rapidly made the jump into fields that were not primarily physical. Through an interesting bridge zone of the operating room, the cockpit, the military were early adopters of this kind of thinking, and then very quickly went into the business world of saying, hey, both mentally and physically, there are ways that we can think and practices and habits that allow us to do a better job. And so I loved just knowing that all this research is out there, but I also understood that I wanted to very practically help people. And there isn't the capacity, like there is an enormous amount of noise. And most people, as they're trying to start their business or run their company, do not have time to read the top 10 bestsellers on personal development or leadership. Right. Like if they get to a couple, awesome. I think the other thing is there's a lot that's out there, but we always have to ask ourselves, what is the marginal impact of this particular idea for a particular person? Mm-hmm. So when I was building my methodology, I knew that I was going to have to distill. I knew I was going to have to focus it because I wanted to actually build it into the methodology and also have some very clear messages or themes that we could come back to again and again and say, what do we see if we look at it from this perspective? And so one of the things as I was distilling was I really came to, I would say, 3 big principles. And these relate back, I think, to what are the 3 big buckets of performance science thematically. And so what's fun, and we could definitely do this, we could talk through what are those principles. And because anyone with a coach, without a coach can pick these up and say, if I think from this viewpoint or lens, what might I do differently in, some goal someone is pursuing or some area of business where they're not getting the results that they want to see. And so I like having different approaches. It's not just one. So you can kind of move around the circle.
I love that. Yeah, anything that you think that the listeners should hear, little nuggets of what that is. Entrepreneurs are seekers, leaders are seekers of information. But like you said, there's so much out there, and it's one thing to listen to the audiobook in the car on the way to whatever and be like, that's such a good idea. Yeah. And then you get to work and you're like, I've got to focus on the bright fires that are burning and I've got to take care of all of these things. So I just love that you have a framework for that.
Yeah. Well, so the way I look at the big buckets of performance science are, you could loosely think that there's a bunch of ideas around strategy or focus, just this idea of what are the right things to be doing? What are the most important things to be doing? There's sort of a bucket around execution, right? If you've decided what you're going to do, then how efficiently or effectively can you get that thing done? And then there's sort of the third bucket, which is related to psychology or what are the mindsets, our confidence or our motivation. And so what I love about having different approaches is people have innately different strengths. Entrepreneurs, like some will be very strategically oriented. Some will be very operations oriented. Some are the total heart and like cheerleader of their company. So we have innate strengths and then also different areas that we have more challenges with. And so again, we don't have to approach performance from just one angle. So then in terms of looking at that, distilling that and saying, okay, but there's a lot of ideas all in those buckets. So I would say I love to start with the strategy bucket. And the principle that I came to that has been helpful for so many clients is this idea of brutal focus. I call it brutal focus because often when we think we are focused, if we're not actually feeling a little bit of pain by all the things we're actually saying no to, then we might actually not be focused enough. So you almost want to feel a little bit of pain.
That's juicy.
And that's what I call brutal focus. The way this really comes into coaching for me is that we always start an engagement by actually doing a good amount of time up front to get some clarity on what is it that you want to have happen. And this is something we can do at home too. Again, sometimes it helps people like to think in goals. Some people hate goals. So I just like to ask the question, what are the results you want to have happening? Like describe it as well as you can. And it's really helpful when you can say, what is it not? Or what is not as important? Like if you had to say of all the things you want, what are really the most important things? And then I think the second thing is this question of, all right, there are a number of things you could do to go after those results that you want, but they're different things are going to give you a different amount of impact. And I always say we should start from the presumption that you will not do it all. I will not do it all. Jamie's not going to do it all. Like none of us are going to do it all. And when we start from that assumption, then we can see that how we improve our performance is in how well we can actually choose, and that saying no to things is a piece of it, that's actually a part of improving our performance. So that's how I always start, and how that piece or that principle of brutal focus comes into the coaching. And to be very clear, it's iterative. So sometimes we feel like, oh, I have to sit down and define my goals and then define what's most important, like what are the priorities, and then just go, and it's not going to change. But that gets us stuck trying to get it perfect. So I like to say we should try and brutally focus, but also remember that we should revisit that question along the way and be like, what has changed? What has changed in my landscape? What has changed in my heart? These are all different ways to say, what's shifting? And does that mean my priorities are shifting? Look at me. I thought I wanted to be an academic physician and got 10 years in and was like, oh, okay. This isn't actually going to be what I need it to be. Okay, I'm going to have to shift my priorities in a dramatic way. So that's the first principle. Brutal focus, a great way to look at things if you aren't feeling like maybe you're getting the results you want, is to take some time to come back and rethink and revisit. What do I want? And then most importantly, what is actually going to give me the biggest impact towards that? And have I focused that enough to make sure that I can give my best effort to those things?
When you were talking about the priority shifting, took me right back to when you were talking about the surgeon's decision is to cut or not cut. You were talking about within the operation or within the patient, but really in your life, you chose whether to cut or not cut. You are coaching people to do the walk you've actually walked. So I love that so much. And it does change. It does change so much. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah. So when you're working with your clients, is it that then you start from square one and you listen to what they want and don't want, and then you coach them using your methodology? Or what does it look like to work with you? I mean, I'm personally intrigued, but I know our listeners will be too.
Yes, we do start at square one, but we take a longer period of time to get started. So sometimes I call this the onboarding session or a personal retreat for people, frankly. But we take actually 5 hours. So we have some room to have a break, but that's where we incorporate that brutal focus. And as I said, it's iterative. So it's not that we can't shift as we go along, but I find it really helps us build momentum up front. And then once we've sort of defined what we think their priorities are and what their goals are, then we do ongoing coaching sessions that happen with some frequency. And what I love about that is that kind of brings us to that second bucket, which is that execution bucket, or how do we then make sure that we're supporting them in executing what they need to in a way that's effective and that's efficient. And as you can imagine, this often requires sometimes some habit change or building a new skill, practicing something. And the way I talk about this as a principle of performance is they're trying to cultivate power, right? Like they're trying to build their capabilities. Sometimes they're trying to build their visibility in the marketplace or in the workplace. And also they're learning how to really get themselves to do things that might be new or different. Also, how to get themselves to not do things that aren't related to their priorities that need some other solution. One of the things I often talk about that I think is a really useful tool that we can all use is what it actually looks like to be growing or working on something, like building a new skill. And I refer to it as the 90-90-90 principle. And sometimes people get kind of bogged down when we're starting because we're like, oh my gosh, like there's all these different things I could do to get started on this thing. And brainstorming with people how to get started is something we certainly would do in a coaching session. But what I love about the 90-90-90 principle is that I say, you know what? Okay, there are a number of different ways that you could get started on something or do the thing, but there's only a couple ways that we fail. And so the 90-90-90 refers to the fact that when we fail to get going on something or build a new skill or improve ourselves, that it's usually because 90% of people just don't start, right? We get stuck in analysis paralysis.
Oh, so true.
Or we psych ourselves out, or we don't make the time to start, like put some time on the calendar to be like, I'm going to get started. So that's the first 90. The second 90 is that of people who get started on something, 90% stop too soon. Like they stop before they've really developed the habit, or how do they put time in their calendar for that thing? Or how do they make sure they have regular opportunities to practice? Maybe it's public speaking that they're trying to get better at, or they just don't give it enough time. They stop too soon, or they think like, oh, I'm not getting anywhere. I don't feel any better than when I started, but they haven't given themselves enough reps. So that's the second 90. The third 90 of how we fail is that for people who start and then they keep going, then they don't actually iterate or change how they're practicing as it becomes clear that there might be something more effective that they could be doing. So a great example of this might be, I'm currently learning Portuguese, and, I was working on like the Duolingo app, and which is great. But then as I went along, I realized there were some challenges. Duolingo gets harder really fast. And it was very easy at the beginning, like dog, cat, coffee. Awesome. And then it was like all sorts of conjugations that I wasn't really understanding the grammar rule behind. And so I realized like, I need to take a class with a teacher, and I need some of these principles explained. And then Duolingo can be a helpful tool. But so this third 90 is if we keep just practicing, if I had kept practicing with Duolingo, my learning curve would have sort of plateaued off. And so as we go along, we do have to sometimes change how we're practicing or training ourselves or building skills. And so that's that third 90. And the key though, the third and the second 90s are different. So we need to keep going. And sometimes we actually quit too soon because we're trying to iterate too early. So what I often say is give yourself a good 3-stage process. And you can even define, what does it look like to get started? And then say, how long do I just want to do whatever was my best idea about process to practice? How long do I actually want to give that so that I know I've actually really bought into the process and bought into making time for it? And when do I do it? And how do I do it? And what are my tools that I use? Just really get comfortable with it. Build the habit. Then you can change and shift later. When you say, I'm going to reconsider it 3 months, then do I want to keep going on this particular process? Or do I want to introduce something new? For example, like a Portuguese class. So this is a tool that, because for many of my clients, there's something that they're trying to get started on. And I love having a model to think about it that sets us up for success, knowing how, like, why is this challenging for us as human beings? And how can we avoid those things? So how do we cultivate that power for ourselves?
I love a good system. So that really resonates with me. One of the things that I do in my work is that I have a program that provides professional and personal development for moms that want to start businesses or grow the businesses that they've started. And so that really distills down, like you said, the message that, you might have to try a lot of things on the same path in order to be successful. And so there's the sunk cost. You don't want to say, oh, well, I've already started this. I have to stay down this exact tendency or this exact whatever it is, social media platform or rental or product line or whatever it is. You want to be able to be nimble with it, but you also don't want to say, well, it didn't work, so I'm stopping entirely. That's really helpful. I love the way that you think. I really do. That's so great. This is a message for the moms out there who are intrigued with the idea of starting a business. Those of you who have had an idea floating around in your mind. I'm here to tell you that you can make entrepreneurship a reality in a way that fits into your family life. It really is possible with the right guidance. I'm Jamie Gale, founder of Boss Mama, and I have been exactly where you are. Over the past decade plus of owning a growing business that I love, along with a family that I love, I have learned important lessons and I'm sharing them with you. There are a few things that you need to know before you get started, and I've put together a free resource specifically for moms like you. You don't need to have all the answers right now, and you certainly don't have to do it alone. Click the link in our show notes to download the free guide and take the first steps towards making that carpool mileage brainstorm a thriving reality. Let's get the fire started in your business today. Grab your free guide in our show notes. When people come to you, are you more helping them with their own personal sort of habits and tendencies in their attempt to execute as a high performer? Or are you more looking at their companies? What does it mostly look like when people work with you?
Great question. Jamie, it's a mix. And that has to do with you have to look at what for each client is their frame of reference. So, for example, I work with some CEOs of startups, and they are looking very much at the company. And there are often some personal, like what they need to be doing as a leader mixed into that. But there is often a good amount of what is that sort of vision or strategy, or how are they thinking about what needs to happen for the company to scale and be successful. And then for other clients, depending on where they're at, for example, sometimes when there is a leader within a company and they are working to transition to that next level, like they want to make that jump, we might be looking at some more personal skill development. Mm-hmm. A common one I'll just bring up in case it resonates with your audience is when we talk about performance, one of the common sort of myths or things we miss or forget about is that we're constantly thinking about what are the results we're producing. So for example, if you're a leader in a company and you're like, hey, my team is totally delivering great results, so we're good. Like people will see the great work we're doing. And one of the challenges is that actually it is not enough often, particularly within corporate systems, to just be doing the great work and expecting it will be noticed and then that you will, for example, be promoted or given that next opportunity. And it is not because anyone is malicious. It's not because people are ignoring you or working against you. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's just as human beings, we are very self-focused. And so we do need to be willing to make our results visible to other people. And that doesn't have to be in a sort of gross self-promotional way. Right. But one way to view this is just that when we help other people see our results, whether it's our peers or our boss, our skip level, is that we're actually helping them understand what value we have to offer and give that person and also the company. And often what it looks like it's not, look at all this stuff I did. It often comes in the form of like, hey, here's what my team is doing. Here's what I'm really excited about that we've produced. It can absolutely be a we statement, but it's this really interesting phenomenon. And again, there are lots of wonderful people, humble people who are doing great work. And so one piece of performance that is important is share that work, because it also means you will be able to impact more and contribute more because people will know about it. They'll know what problem to come to you with, or like what project might be perfect for you and your team. Right. So you can think of it as a gift you're actually giving other people, not as this selfish self-advertisement.
That's sort of what I was gathering from what you were explaining, is that it really is about the practices of the individual, maybe more so than like, what's the best sales strategy for your program or your plan? And I really love that, because I do think that people in leadership and business owners, we don't take that time to really, it's a form of self-care, the coaching that you're doing, that we can say has numbers results, right? You're looking at this from a scientific standpoint, you're looking at results, but it really is a way to nurture and honor the work that we've done to get to this point. And I do think that is so hard to find the time, but we often don't. You're saying like, you got to go and do all those things. So I really, really love this whole idea of performance coaching for the leader, rather than just like, what does the project need or what does the workplace need? When we're in leadership, we often do not this type of coaching, but we support the people that are working on our teams without really taking time to think, what do we need? And the visibility piece, I think, is really key. It's something I'm struggling with right now, because I have, dedicated the past 10 years of my business to building these programs. And some of them I intentionally am not visible in as much because it's really about the camp. I run a lot of children's programming. And so it doesn't have to really be about me. It's about the product. But things like my Boss Mama program, which is for the moms that own businesses, or, even the podcast, I really do need to be visible in a way that makes me a little bit squeamish. And so I don't do it in the way that my team members would like me. They're like, go put your, film the reel, do the thing, go make the contact. And so I definitely could use your coaching. And so I definitely want to get in touch with you because I think it's really, really valuable. What are the types of things you see if someone finishes their coaching with you? Like you're talking about the importance of sharing results. What are the results that people see?
This is a great question. And I would say some of the benefits, again, these are thematic, but I see them coming up enough that it's going to be different for different people because they come in for different reasons. But I would say the big themes often are, number one, they get very practiced at whether it's a small situation or a macro situation, the art of getting to some clarity. And as we know, clarity is an iterative process, but it's a practice. So being able to, when they encounter something versus just sort of reacting, to say, all right, what do I need out of this situation? What do I want out of this situation or this more macro thing that's happening? What is the goal? And if I can't have everything I want, what is most important? And then also, what is going to be most important for getting that? So they just get to practice that as a high performance skill. I think this is what high-performing people do. It's not that they know all the answers. They get really good at practicing stopping and asking that question periodically. So I think that's like number one. I think that number two is they get a lot of like a comfort with how is it that you basically improve at something, like get started on something new and build that habit of whatever it is, right? How do they think through that, building that power or momentum for themselves and what it looks like to be patient for a compounding process. So when I'm thinking about the 90-90-90, that's for stuff, it's rarely a sprint. Like, because most leaders I know, like I work with, they know how to pull an all-nighter. They know how to sprint on something when it really must happen. But the problem is that's actually not what they want to be practicing. They want to understand how they can get the results, like the big ambitious goals they have. How do I get that without having it be just a series of all-nighters that are not sustainable and that leave them like a shell when they're done? And so learning how to pace is a piece of it. There's actually this amazing story about the Iditarod, so the dog race up in Alaska, where someone totally blew the race open when they taught the dogs how to pace themselves, like not to run full force and then rest, and then full force and then rest. But the sledder who was like, I can teach them to go off their full pace. And he won the race, I think, a number of years in a row. And it just surprised everyone because no one had done that. And so I think about that, the dog race, every time when I think about pacing as an entrepreneur. And so I think that's another piece. Wow. And then the third piece is really working with people and being a thought partner to them as they learn to develop what is their relationship with uncertainty. The third principle of performance I think is really important is this idea of being able to relish uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it's also where a lot of the opportunity is. I mean, I was at max uncertainty when I left medicine and said, I'm going to start this different kind of practice and create it and then have to build the business of it also, because it wasn't something where you like, whatever, you take over a franchise and then you just do it. But I think that's something I actually do a lot of work with clients on is how are they mentally managing that uncertainty over time? And also, how are they tactically managing the uncertainty over time? So both mindsets that keep them from reacting to uncertainty in ways that are not productive or high performing, like trying to avoid it, trying to control it, and also how they can actually have some more, if not fun, at least like engagement with it. Because again, like a part of the reason that building a company is exciting and interesting is because it's not all scripted and because, you know, there's potentially a lot of upside. So I think that's that's the last thing that people get some more comfort with as a theme. And then of course there's all sorts of individual skills that people build depending on what they're interested in. And that's fun too. But I would say those are like 3 really big themes that people develop and take with them. Again, that doesn't necessarily require continual coaching to leave that legacy that then goes into everything else they do.
So how long does someone typically work with you?
There is a range. I have clients I've worked with for over 5 years, and they have big goals and milestones along the way. And I continue to support them in that. And then I have some people come in and they have a really targeted goal. Sometimes that is a transition in career, getting to that next level. They want to take maybe 2024 and invest in themselves in, building, let's say, more executive presence and confidence in their work so they can make that next promotion level. And for those people, then we might do just what is the initial engagement, which is a 5-hour session to onboard, and then 10 sessions after that, right? Like a really targeted thing. So people use it in different ways. There's some flexibility. I always want the coaching to serve the person and their goal, not for the coaching to become like, oh, it has to be this. I built the coaching with the performance principles in mind, but like it to be flexible for people.
I love that. This is so intriguing and so cool. And I love the science approach. And I really think it's no surprise that you're successful with it, because high performers and leaders want to have tested strategies to improve. Kudos to you for helping so many people achieve that growth and that improvement. I'm so curious. We heard about sort of your young adult life and your beginning of your career, but if we zoom out even further back, do any examples come to mind of how you gravitated toward leadership roles as a child? Or what tendencies did you have that still show up today in your work?
That is interesting. I don't think I gravitated towards leadership roles, but I definitely gravitated towards looking for challenging things and then going to try and figure them out. And that's what's really, I think, the most clear pattern. Like, there's a joke in my family. They're like, Carla will look around and she'll be like, oh, what's the most challenging thing here? Great. Make it a double. I was not a fearless person. I think it's probably all in how you define it, but I remember being nervous. I remember I had all the same, I think, fears that are common in childhood of wanting to belong, wanting to be able to be a part of things, and wanting to feel like I was good at things. And so it was not that I was not nervous. I remember being nervous a lot, but I think part of it was I learned that if I could just go do things and put myself through enough challenging things, I think there was a piece of me that thought, well, then you won't be nervous. And of course, later I was like, oh yeah, that's not true.
Yeah.
Not true. That feeling will still arise. But what is interesting is you sort of build this library of experiences where you're like, well, got through that. I mean, for example, I'm like, oh man, Carla, if you could get through at 33, leaving medicine and rebuilding your career around something you tremendously love, there will probably need to be another pivot in the future. I don't know what it is, or not, but if there is, you can do that too. So that's what I remember. And I guess the other thing I would say is sometimes you need to be the driver or the leader. Again, my practice, I have a number of professionals who help support me for different things that I do, but I do the coaching. So I don't have other coaches who do the coaching. But I think I always wanted to be a part of a really great team. And I was like, oh, with a really great leader, I would just love that. I didn't think I even had to be the leader. But what I think I've learned over the course of my career is I didn't find that. In medicine, I didn't find it. And, some of that's just luck of the draw. But sometimes you just have to be willing to say either, great, I will be the leader then, or I will be the driver, versus waiting around for someone to make the team that you want to be a part of. And that is often how leaders are born. And so that would be my thought is you don't have to always have been the person running for student office and, this or that, or always wanting to lead the group to actually find yourself and to be quite successful in building something, driving something, leading something.
That's great. And it's no surprise. I mean, you went for the MD PhD route, that's double the challenge right there. So that carried right on through. Does anyone come to mind that you could shout out who did believe in your leadership skills, maybe even before you saw yourself in that way?
This is an interesting one, just in terms of like how, like the medical pathway, are you leading? But in the spirit of the question, someone who gave me a gift that really paid off for a long time. So when I was in college and I realized that I wanted to not just do an MD, but actually I wanted to do the MD PhD program, and I needed research experience, and I didn't have any research experience. And a friend who also went to school with me from my high school, his father, Dr. Larry Corey, was a prominent researcher and physician at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. He was out for a visit to his son, and they were sitting in a Starbucks, and I ran into them, and I had been racking my brain because no one in my family is a doctor. Like, we didn't have ties into that community, but I needed to find someone who would like let me volunteer in their lab. And I suddenly was like, Dr. Corey's a doctor. And of course, like, I think I did not understand sort of how prominent a physician he was, but I just was like, hey, do you know anyone? I mean, I'll work for free, but I need some research experience. Do you know anyone who like wants an undergrad intern for the summer for free? And he not only gave me a job, he let me pick what piece of his lab I worked in, and he paid me for that summer, and really opened. I can probably track down most of the doors that opened after that in terms of getting into a program and all of that based on his willingness and belief in me and his recommendation. And so it was a really valuable thing. And even though I obviously have not ended up in that area of work, I look back at everything I have learned how to do and all the capabilities I built, and I'm just working on a different type of problem, but using all of those same skills. So yeah, a big thank you, to him. That is probably the person.
That's really neat to hear. All right. I have a few last final wrap-up questions for you that are a little bit more rapid fire.
Awesome.
Is there one, besides your own that you've developed, is there one tool or strategy that you use for staying organized and effective, whether that's a tech thing, a paper resource, anything like that? Yeah.
Yes. So I love Excel. My calendar is it's sort of a calendar plus to-do lists are in Excel. And I like it because it lets me very easily move things that need to happen around. I obviously have a Google Calendar for actual meetings, but it just helps me see and reprioritize what needs to happen. But I think the biggest habit tool that I use, so that would be my tech tool. The habit tool is planning time. And let me explain what I actually mean. It sounds sort of basic, but I spend some time every week, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time. It could be like half an hour, 20 minutes, but I'm looking at the week ahead. I'm looking a couple weeks out, and I am actually blocking time and thinking through both the pacing of clients, but also what time is needed to do the things that are my priority projects that don't necessarily have, someone pushing me along, like that I need to push myself along. And it also helps me see how weeks are shaping up and if things are getting sort of unfeasible. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, do I have some time to eat that day? Okay, I don't. Okay, I probably need to shift something. Yeah. And so I use that, and then I use a micro bit of it like every day. So like at the end of each day, I often put my day to bed, and that's like 5 minutes, but I look at the calendar, I look at what I did, and then I think through, is the week shaping up how I thought? Is it not? What changes do I need to make it flow well so that I can do what I need to do at the level I need to do it? And sometimes that means canceling things or saying, oh yeah, this was a late day and you actually are going to need, some more sleep. So maybe you're not exercising in the morning. And that's like making those adjustments along the way, but also looking out far enough that you can set things up for success versus having to react and change them later. So the combo of weekly planning plus put your day to bed is what I do.
I love that. And that ties right back to how we started this conversation with you saying that you start your day with like, how do you create a day that you, once you stack together, create the life that you want to be living?
That is so well put. I like how you said that.
I really love the putting your day to bed concept. It sort of ties into, I've been seeing a lot just sort of out in the ether, this like do a closing shift in your home idea. And it's like, think of it as like you're working in a restaurant, you're going to do the closing shift, be the one to like wipe the counters down, and how that just sets yourself up so well for the next day. And I've really been leaning on that because a lot of times I am working late and it's just one of those days when I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go to bed. I'm like, no, do the closing shift. And it just only takes a few minutes, but it really does sort of set the next day up so well. So I really love that.
Well, it's like tomorrow's success starts tonight.
Yeah. It's
like, is
totally,
think about it.
Totally. All right. Is there a favorite leadership book or podcast that you tend to go to?
Great question. I think about a lot of these topics like leadership or executive presence or strategic thinking. There's a combo of books that break down this massive topic, but can hit certain parts of it with more impact. And so I do on leadership. I love the Culture Code. I think it's great for people who want to work on executive presence. I might recommend to them the Charisma Myth, followed by Think Faster, Talk Smarter, followed by The Formula, which is a book all about the concept of visibility, which you and I referenced earlier. So that's often how I think about books and these types of skill sets, because leadership is so broad. Of course, it's hard to get it all in one book. And so that's often how I approach these topics. But yeah, I just listed all of those books I think are great. So
awesome. Well, I will link those, and you've added some to my to-read list right now. That's great. All right. My last question for you is, if you had a day off, like completely off, where you could not take care of anything on your Excel spreadsheet and you could not accomplish anything at home, what is one activity that you would do and one place you would go to get something to eat?
Right now we are living in Tucson, Arizona. So we are digital nomads, my husband and I. And so we're here through March, and then we will move somewhere else. But so right now, what I would do with that day off is we would go mountain biking, and then we would get breakfast burritos at this cafe that's nearby. It's called, I think it's Cafe Rez or something like that. And they have these amazing breakfast burritos with like sweet potato in them and everything. So I think that's what we do.
Awesome. Well, I am envious that you're there. I was just in Sedona with my son doing some hiking, and I just cannot wait to go back. I went with my daughter last year and my son this year, and I will be back soon. So probably not before you leave there, but that is such a beautiful area. Well, Dr. Fowler, thank you so incredibly much for joining me today. I know we mentioned a bunch of things and we'll link everything in the show notes, but could you just tell listeners how they can get in touch with you and learn more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So a great place to just learn more about my work is at my website, and that is at thaxa.com, THAXA. And then for people who are just interested in performance science in general and the conversations I'm having about it, I post all of those on LinkedIn, and I'm at Carla-Fowler. So that's a great place to follow along.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I learned so much from you, and it was truly so wonderful to connect with you. And I hope to keep in touch with you and all the cool things that you're working on. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. And to all the listeners, thank you so much for listening today. And we'll be back next time with another inspiring interview. Follow the Leaders is produced by Lit Path Studios, and music is by Shane Ivers. You can hear more about this show and all the other podcasts at Lit Path Studios by going to www.litpathstudios.com.